Advance and be recognized, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations base for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Oriskany Jim, and today we're going to knock out some hobby with some Caesar miniatures Middle East Militia at 1:72 scale. Now, I know that my Force on Force games are usually in 20mm. 1:72 isn't really 20mm, I think that's 1:76, but these are close enough and will work for our purposes. So here are the clear bases that come with those miniatures. I should say that I got 2 boxes of these miniatures, and with each box you get 2 sheets of these clear bases. Nothing against clear bases myself, I just don't use them personally. So here is where I stand so far on these miniatures. As you can see, I've got my own bases already made and put underneath the figures. I've got them primed in the basic gray, and I've got most of the base colors already knocked out. Like their shoes, I think I started with their shoes, and then their pants, any kind of shirt, equipment vest, equipment harness, weapons, and also their skin tone has been painted on there. Again, just in their basic colors. One thing that's a lot of fun when it comes to these kinds of armies, air quotes, again, they're insurgents, they're not really an army, is how everyone's wearing something a little different. It's not like a usual army that you have to chain paint all at once, and needless to say, all the uniforms are more or less the same. You might see some variations in equipment based on rank and role and things like that, special equipment, but let's face it, it's usually the same guy over and over and over again. Not so much with these guys. Like this guy here is almost wearing an outsized or an out of scale sort of a chocolate chip pattern on his vest, saltine pants, and what looks like a pretty basic civilian shirt. And again, I've also got some denim in here. I've got all kinds of different military and civilian patterns. So as you've probably noticed, the one part of the base coloring that I don't yet have done on these miniatures is anything with their hair or their headdress. I just have the basic gray primer on there. So that's where we're going to start with today's video. Alright, so for the hair, it's tempting to just say everybody in that part of the world has black hair. We want a very, very dark brown, so we're going to mix these 2 colors that I'm showing here. And as you guys probably know, if you watch this channel, I use ridiculously cheap craft store paint. I am going to mix the black and this espresso brown to get basically a very, very dark brown. The thing to remember with these acrylics is that they are going to dry darker than they look now when they're wet, and of course afterwards we're going to put a dark wash over it and it's going to get darker still. Okay, so here is our first victim at Mad Oriskany's hair salon. We've got our brush, a little bit of the paint on the brush, and we're going to go ahead and start applying this color. Not exactly rocket science. If you guys watch this channel, you know how to paint a miniature. It's just that we've had so much like historical scenarios, in-depth historical breakdowns on the channel lately. I do want to circle back at least once in a while and get some old school hobby. So old school, like how to build and paint, miniatures that you put on your table once in a while. Okay, now this guy here has a little bit of headgear instead of just his hair. Now I know this blue looks really bright. Again, we are going to dry brush and dark wash these figures, so that's going to tone down quite a bit. And sometimes the headgear does have more than one color. Like this guy has this darker brown sort of band around his headgear. So again, a lot of it's white. But when you do white with acrylics, what you really want to do is a very, very light gray, because you do want something for the dry brushing to pick up on. And of course the dark wash is going to put some more detail in here as well. Also, a lot of these figures don't just have hair on their head, they also have a lot of facial hair. And even if it's not sculpted onto the miniature as such, you may want to think about painting some of this on the figure anyway. Alright, so here we are halfway through the process. I've got 33 figures done so far out of my 66. Alright, time to start the other 33 as far as their hair and headdress goes. So let me try to get a little bit of a lower angle here and show you what I'm looking at. You see where some of these other guys, I did sort of tone down the blue as far as their headgear goes. And I did try to vary it up. A lot of white, by that I mean light gray, and a lot of like black ski masks. And again, for that it's going to be very dark gray, because again, you do want something for the dark wash to pick up on later. Okay, so here we are many hours later with all of the hair and headgear at least base colored onto the figures. All 66 figures. You will see where I've got my two hostages there. There's the only blonde in the whole bunch. Again, I know that looks really bright at the moment. That will tone down with dark wash and dry brushing. But yeah, all the base colors are now done for these miniatures. Okay, we're back the next day for some dark washing, and I actually have some real grown-up paints here. You can see here some Vallejo sepia wash. That's going to be the wash for the basic clothing and equipment on these figures. I also have some Vallejo flesh wash for the skin tones. I'll probably mix this with a little bit of the sepia as well, so I get some regional appropriate skin tones here on these figures. And last but not least, I'll also have some blue for some of the metal in the weapons. Alright, so the one thing with Vallejo washes is that you always do have to cut it with a fair amount of water. Vallejo washes are fantastic products, don't get me wrong, but you do have to thin them out a little bit. So here you see me adding some water to my sepia wash, which is also, I'll be honest, a little light. So I'm also going to cut it with just a couple drops of black that you see here, and the final color you see there in my painting tray. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is the Vallejo sepia wash cut with just a little bit of black and a fair amount of water. And that's just because Vallejo wash, as you guys probably know if you've ever used it, it is a great product, but it is a little thick. And if you just, great for pin washing, don't get me wrong, but there's no way in hell I'm going to pin wash these 66 infantry figures. That's just going to drive me crazy. So for a general, I'm just going to literally wash the whole figure in this paint. You do want to cut it with a fair amount of water, otherwise you're going to way overdo it, and it's going to look like all your guys literally just got done fighting a battle in an oil well. They fight battles for the oil wells, not in the oil wells. Alright, so as I hope you guys can see, this one's going to show up a little bit better. It doesn't show up too well on his brown trousers, but on that lighter colored jacket, this dark wash really picks up the detail on these Caesar 1-72 figures. And yeah, it's working really great on that. So as you guys probably know, dark wash is going to work great on the lighter colors, and your dry brushing, what you're looking for there is on the lighter colors. So we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Alright, so now that all of the general washing is complete, it's time to start on the skin tones. And again, we have Vallejo flesh wash. Again, for this example, cut with a little bit of that sepia just so that it is a little bit of, region appropriate. I don't want these guys looking like refugees from Ireland or something like that. And again, these are 1-72 scale figures, so really all I'm looking for is something to pop out some of the facial features, especially the eyes, and maybe the fingers. But that's really about it, because most of these guys don't have too much skin showing on the miniature. Alright, so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and start again with some of that blue wash on the gunmetal, on the weapons. There's a couple guys with blades showing, but it's pretty much just firearms. And a lot of the firearms are AKs. And you got to be careful here because AKs are not all, the usual gunmetal black. There's a lot of wooden furniture on an AKM family weapon, so you don't want to blue wash over the wooden furniture of the weapon. You got to be careful of that. And there we go. Most of the wash is now complete. That took, most of the evening, at least after work. And yeah, these guys are ready to go for the next stage. So I'll be back tomorrow to get started on the dry brushing once the wash here gets a chance to dry overnight. Okay, so here we are back on day 3 of our finish up process, and it's time to start the dry brushing once I get this guy in focus. Alright, so I tend to overdo dry brushing on some of my figures. I'm being very careful this time not to do that. I'm using a very, very light brown, cut with a fair amount of acrylic white, and, very, very, very lightly apply the dry brushing onto the highlights of the figure. So again, just trying to go over the highlights of the miniature and pick up some additional detail. Here's another figure where you can see me trying to very lightly apply it, not only on his equipment vest, but also on his cargo pants. So you see where it picks up the cargo pocket, some of the folds in the fabric, up along his shoes. And here it's where it's really showing up. This is a good figure to demonstrate what I was talking about before. And again, you guys probably already know this. But on the lighter colors, the dry brushing doesn't work so well. That's where your dark wash really comes into play. Conversely, on the darker colors, where your dark wash didn't really pick anything up, that's where your dry brushing really comes in. And for my dry brush, I should mention that I'm using a very, very light mocha brown, cut with a generous amount of white. This is to get, again, that very light color, and also kind of a dusty, sandy kind of a look for Middle East battlefields. Okay, so here is all the base dry brushing done on all 66 figures. We've got a little bit more to do on dry brushing. We'll be back tomorrow for day 4 of our finish up process here for some interference blue on the weapons and so on. But this is where we are for the moment. A lot more detail is starting to pop out on these Caesar miniatures. Okay, so here we are back again. I'm using some interference blue for a sort of it's a semi-dry brush process again, but not really. It's like a very, very light coat of paint. Yeah, I guess you could call it a dry brush. It's just a little bit heavier than the dry brush. And this is just something I like to do on gunmetal. And again, this is only going to be on the metal parts of the weapons. Once again, for AKs, you've got a lot of wooden furniture to look out for. And what this gives you is a very basic sort of a metallic, oop, that was a little bit too much there, let me knock some of that off. Sort of a gunmetal blue kind of a shine. So hopefully as I rotate the figure here in the lamp light, you can sort of see what I'm going for here. It looks a little metallic now, again with that gunmetal blue. And that's what I'm going for here. Again, you got to be careful because you only want the metal parts on all of these AK family weapons. Alright, so now we have all of the dry brushing done. I do like to go back and do just a little bit of extra detail on that interference blue. Let's get started on the basing material. So I have some crushed up sand here. I do try to draw from the bottom of the bag where the grain is a little bit smaller, especially on smaller figures like 15 mil or 20 mil. That big coarser grain sand and small pebbles is great for 28 mil, but I don't want these guys, fighting through a rubble pile. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of my crushed up pebbles and sand, put in some basic hobby flocking. It just doesn't want to come out of the, and of course then I get too much. First it wouldn't come out, then I got too much. It's like ketchup here. Alright, so let me try to get some of this out of there. And what I'll do is, yeah, that's way too much green. I don't want that much green on the bases. I'll just add some more sand to balance out the overall color and texture of my basic mixture here. Okay, so I've added some more sand and gravel to the mix, and this is more like the texture and color that I'm aiming for. Because to be fair, these guys are going to be in a lot of Afghanistan scenarios, northern Iraq, northern Syria, like where ISIS used to operate, those kind of scenarios. And you don't really want like just pure sand. There's going to be some green in the terrain there. I'm also going to pick out some of the larger pebbles because again these are only 20 millimeter figures, and then we're going to go ahead and get started actually applying the bases. Alright, so here we go. Here's our first victim when it comes to basing. I get one of my old brushes. You guys know the kind. Doesn't really hold a point anymore. You kind of save it for, grunt work and dry brushing, terrain work and stuff like that. And I'm using it to apply a nice, thick, generous coat of just basic white glue. I mean, basic school glue, really. I don't really use anything super fancy here. Do gotta make sure that you don't get any on his boots, or at least not too much. And then we more or less dunk him into the basing mix. So I make sure that the whole base is covered. I give it a quick press. Now, normally I leave it sit in there at least, I get like 5 or 6 guys, and I leave them in there for at least like 5, 10, maybe even 20 minutes. But just for editing purposes on this video, I'm going to go ahead and take him out now and show you what I'm looking at. So once again, we got to make sure that none of it really hangs off of the edge of the base or gets on his boots. But that's pretty much the first guy done there. Alright, so now we have the first rank, or first team, done here for our bases. And lucky me, I get to do that 10 more times, because I got them arranged, 6 to a file here, and there's 66 total figures. So 6 down, and 60 more to go. Hooray! Alright, so it's been a long night, but here we are. All of the basing is now complete. Probably the toughest guys to do were these prone figures, and that's just because, they do tend to sort of sink down into the basing material. A little bit of that is okay. In fact, it's actually kind of cool when the rocks and sand and pebbles sort of, wash over the top of the boots a little bit. That way the guy really looks like he's standing in the terrain, but you don't want to overdo it. So sometimes a clean brush or even a needle is used to pick off some of the extra bits. But yeah, there we go, and the basing is more or less complete. And here is one last look, everybody, under much better lighting conditions. Maybe I should do more of my painting in this room, because clearly the lighting is better in here. But this gives a much better look at what the miniatures actually look like when you're holding them in your hand. I might put a little bit of a matte varnish over this to sort of protect the paint job into the future, but as you can see, the paint job and the basing is more or less complete. And that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There's an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Oriskany Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode. And as always, Tango Mike for watching.